I am ready for the Festival of Legends to begin, and I've already prepared 15 decks that you should play on day 1. Oh, I'm sorry, did I say that I had 15 decks available for you guys? That's actually somewhat of a lie. I have a lot of different decks and a lot of different guides, and honestly different people that you can check out their ideas, so there's going to be a lot of information in this video, so make sure that you like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and definitely check out the description below for not only all the deck codes, but for every single link that I'm going to be talking about, because there are 3 other creators that I'm going to be pulling deck ideas from, or actually more than 3 creators, so let's just go ahead and jump into these decks, because I am super excited to showcase what we have been working on. And honestly, Warlock is looking extremely scary right now, both from an aggro perspective and from a control perspective. I'm going to do my best to go through these decks as quickly as possible just to show you the ideas and tell you the main idea of the deck, because every single one of these decks honestly has a potential being made into a deck guide if it hasn't already. Like, there are already some archetypes that I've already made with a few changes. So let's go ahead and talk about Big Warlock a little bit. The idea here is just to play Thaddeus with Jailer and Mal'Ganis all in the same turn. Because of the polarities, you could easily do both of these in the same turn, depending on which one's which. But this is just what Big Warlock is already been doing with the potential scam. But it has a lot of these other scam cards from the new rotation, like Void Caller being really, really good. 3 mana, Hellfire, and 2 mana Defile are absolutely bonkers for Control Warlock. So what is the best way to complement all of these cards? Well, the Fatigue Package, Crazed Conductor. I'm surprised that the 2 mana Imp doesn't find its way into this deck, but I imagine that you don't want other demons mucking up what can happen with Dirge of Despair, so never mind, I just figured that out really quickly for you guys, in case you want to know why that's not in the deck. But Crescendo is still really good. AoE tool, Fell String Harp is insane healing for the cost. Like, this is just exactly what this deck does in order to make its taps not cost too much, and now you have all these insane synergies working together. And this is a deck that was made by Thijs, so Thijs is really on board with Control Warlock, and there's a lot of people that are saying this deck is going to be good, so watch out for Control Warlocks on day 1. Next up is Big Beast Hunter, and I think that this deck has a lot of potential because Big Beasts work really well with, have been worked really well in the previous expansion, and it just Hunter got a lot of support, especially with Banjosaur, with Amplified Elec, King Mukla, Jungle Jammer. These are all extremely good cards, but I'm still not sure 100% how to build this deck yet. But I like this idea of being able to run a bunch of 1-drops with a bunch of bananas in the early game in order to give us a bunch of pressure and early game minions that are always dealing damage to the face. But everything else about this deck is screaming late game, because once your early game has been dealt with, now you have your Sharan Sabers and potential like big minion scams that absolutely just are going to dominate anybody that can't deal with this long-term game plan. Like, they could stop your early turns pretty effectively, but now you have like King Crushes that are potentially 16 damage that can end the game. Lorthamar is honestly not a card that a lot of people have faith in, but I still think there's a possibility of this being good just to give us, you know, like a turn 7, turn 8 automatic deals 16 damage win condition. But a lot of other creators are also looking into Twin Bow Terracoil to work with Faithful Companions to discover 2 beasts at once. So that might have some potential as like the best tempo play that you can do in this kind of deck. So if you don't like the idea of Lorthamar, you can put in the Terracoil. But I still like the idea of Lorthamar regardless, just because of the high roll potential, and honestly, the big minions are just something that I absolutely love and don't really want to get rid of right now. So unfortunately, I can't find it right now, but Lorthamar does have potential in this deck, and I really hope that maybe some version of this deck is playable, because there's a lot going for it right now. Next up, we have one of the weirdest decks that I'm really not sure how to build properly, and we're going to figure out on day 1 once we see some other people messing with this archetype. But this archetype has like the most diverse lists that I've ever seen, and this was a list that I made on stream today to try to make it as tempo oriented as possible, while also having like some high roll possibilities. So if you've seen my video on Rainbow Death Knight already, you guys already know that Paparazzi is an amazing way to be able to find Lord Marigar, so you can spend every single one of your corpses. So that is the reason why I only have Bone Guard Commander as the only card in this deck that actually spends corpses, because we're trying to summon Lord Marigar, or we're trying to find Corpse Explosion off of our Nerubian Viziers. So I really think that this deck just has to be like all in on aggro, and then you can use Climatic Necrotic Explosion as like your AoE tool. or like your big burst combo if you could somehow make it to this stage of the game. But the overall win condition of this deck, or the idea, is to get to 11 mana, play Queen Ishara so you can get the Ring, which will make a 1-copy spell of your Necrotic Explosion, and then you can play 2 Necrotic Explosions in the same turn. That idea just seems really, really cool to me, and I still have Fizzler in here to try and fizzle the Climactic Explosion, but we took out the location card that that discovers a card. Disposed Stole, I believe it's called. That card just doesn't really like have that much potential in this deck because we're not running the Mosh Pit, unfortunately. So I don't really think this card is going to find its way in here unless we're playing Renathal. And if we're playing Renathal, then it's really hard to draw the Climactic Necrotic Explosion when you need it. So I'm still trying to find a 30-card version that can somehow work. We still have the Undead synergies. We have Defrost, which is very important for card draw, Plague Spreader for removal, Arcanite Reaper as a decent weapon. Obviously, Rancher into Swarmguard to give us as many corpses as possible, but I might be focusing too much on this Swarmguard Rancher combo. There might be better ways of being able to do this. So Rainbow Death Knight has a lot of potential. It's just a matter of finding the best 30 or 40, and this is going to be my attempt on the first day to try and make this deck work. Next up is a deck that I know is going to be good. It's just a matter of how exactly we're going to build its late game. Because I'm not going to lie, I'm really enjoying this look of this this Imp Warlock deck. And I'm actually finding a way to put in Symphony of Sins because this card kind of makes sense. Like, some Implocks ran Tamsin, right? Like, sometimes you need a card that has some kind of, like, comeback ability in form of AoE, in form of a scam, or what have you. This card might be a way of doing that. And case in point, one synergy that I want to point out is actually a synergy that is possible with Dracondric Fear, however you pronounce this card. Because if you happen to draw the card, or you happen to find the card that gives you a copy, or I'm sorry, that draws the highest cost card in your deck and reduces it by 6, then you can play this for 1 mana. That already seems insane, and it's just, you know, a deal 6 fireball effect that could work really well. But that's the reason why we have Symphony of Sins and this in the deck. Other than that, it's just a straight up aggressive deck. So it's just exactly what I think what Implock wants to do. Summons minions and then has like a top end that can sometimes end the game if your opponent clears the board. It has a little bit of healing. But Implock is a deck that has a lot of potential, and I'm really hoping that we have ways of being able to stop it. Next up is a deck that I think is going to have a lot of potential in this metagame, and it is just simply Frost DK. This deck is very similar to what the deck is already, but there is a Mosh Pit and Lady Deathwhisper high roll that I think is going to take a lot of people by storm. And the reason why we only have one Mosh Pit is because we really don't care about giving this ability to any other minion except, I guess, Egg for a 3/3. But the reason why this is really good is because you can turn one Frostworm Fury into 4, and that is just game-winning by itself in a lot of aspects. Metronome also works really well in this deck because you have Horn of Winter plays, and being able to consistently play a 1 into a 2 into a 3 is exactly what you want to do with this deck, especially when you have important 2-drops like your Mosh Pit, like your Harbinger of Winter, to always draw the cards that you need consistently. And then if you somehow have Metronome survive to draw a 3 into a 4, then look at all these 4s you have for you, man. Like, I ended up having Instrument Tech in this deck when I had Bonebreaker in the list, but I think this might be a better way of being able to play the deck. But Bonebreaker still might be important enough for us to somehow slot into the deck. So if Mosh Pit and if Lady Deathwhisper just aren't worth it, then you can just go back to running like a Bonebreaker, and maybe you can fit in an Instrument Tech depending on how you want to build this deck. But I think that some form of Frost DK is going to be so good that people have to play it if aggro is absolutely dominant. Next up, we have what I believe to be the best warrior deck that you can play on day 1. And it's actually not a control warrior, believe it or not. It is a Menagerie Tempo Warrior. I mean, it's more appropriate to call this a mech deck, but there is a lot of Menagerie synergies that work really well just because you run a lot of these Amalgam cards. These Amalgam cards are super high stonk right now, and depending on what decks you're looking at. But cards like Roaring Applause and Party Animal are the exact reason why these cards work so well, because say you play like a Frequency Oscillator on turn 1, and then you play Party Animal, give a bunch of cards in your hand, +1/+1. You play like a Mistake into an Amalgam, and then you have like Coin War Gear as a possibility on like 3 different minions. Like, it's insane how this deck is quote-unquote Menagerie, but it really is just a mech deck, and a lot of these mechs have other tribes attached to them, like, for example, the Amalgam minions, but also like your Hook Fist. So these Menagerie cards work really well because if you have a mech if you have this pirate and if you have 2 amalgams on the field, that is 4 different tribe minions, and then suddenly this draws 5 cards. Suddenly this is like impending catastrophe, but for warrior. And then you have all these, these tempo tools in order to give you all this damage, war gears. You can even copy them with Rockmaster Voon. Like, this deck has a lot of potential, even with like Pozic that can even summon more mechs from your opponent's hand. So I think there's a lot going for Menagerie Warrior right now, and this was a deck that was made by Kibler, very similar to his deck that he used in the Theorycraft. But I took out the Power Slider because it really doesn't make too much sense to. Like, he had to hit the new card requirement. You needed 10 new cards, so you take this card out, put in a War Gear, and then boom, this deck looks perfect on paper. But will it actually dominate the meta? Only time can tell. But if you're somebody that likes Control Warrior, then why not take a look at this deck that can use Last Stand, Black Rock and Roll, as well as Fury Stalwart, as well as Ziliax to give you the biggest minions possible and actually give us a payoff for playing Black Rock and Roll that isn't just play big minions. But you still do have these big minions in order to deal game-winning amounts of damage. And unfortunately, Grom doesn't make it in this deck, only because we have literally, like, Slam as like the only card that can enable the Grom. And honestly, we took out the Slam for some other survivability cards because we don't run Execute. We don't really care about the draw that it gives us. So this deck looks pretty sweet in my eyes because it finally gives Trenchstalker a legitimate way to be played. Maybe you can fit in Lorthamar if you're really greedy, but I feel like since we're playing a 5-mana do-nothing, we kind of need to be able to supplement our next couple of turns without setting up some kind of overall scam. Lorthamar is really, really cool in Hunter, but I believe since Hunter is always pressuring the early game, it can have like that 1 turn to do nothing by like turn 7 to set up a game-winning play. This is very similar, but you can do it by turn 5 and then have these other cards keep you alive until you play your really big cards. But imagine like Black Rock and Roll into Last Stand, double the stats, play Ziliax. Like, I already made a video covering this, but this can also work with this card right here with Rush, Taunt, and it can be targeted by spells or hero power. So this card might actually be good going into the next expansion. And if you look into Last Stand, this is exactly the same card that they I think this is the same card. It looks like it. Wait, no, this is the 2/5 that gains, like, Divine Shield or something. Regardless, this synergy is really worth noting, and it might actually be legitimate on day 1 especially. Next up, we have a deck that almost every single content creator is scared of right now, and this is Courteous of Vicious Syndicate, and I'll go ahead and leave a post to this down below, but they have so many decks available on their most recent meta breakdown of the Theorycraft stream that it's definitely a huge resource to take advantage of to maybe see if some of their ideas are similar to your ideas. So go ahead and check out the link below for this entire guide or this entire article, but for now we're just going to focus on my Demon Hunter list because I think that this is a pretty solid direction. This isn't card for card what the Vicious Syndicate list was talking about, but I think that Magnifying Glaive is super good in this deck because I ended up going up against Jambray, who played the Magnifying Glaive to great success against me, and it really showed me the potential of aggro DH being a really solid deck. It's just a matter of if we're going to play a deck that just vomits an entire hand and draws consistently with the Magnifying Glaive as well as the Sightless Magistrate. Battlecry, both players draw until they have 5 cards. Seems pretty good, right? But it only is good if you have a way of being able to empty out your hand, and if we're playing a bunch of cards that are 4 mana or less, it may not be that difficult. But we still have cards like Spectral Sight, so I'm going to choose to wait on this card for now because I love the synergies that are already here. I'm not going to lie, Snakebite was like my pick for like the best card in the meta, but this card unfortunately just doesn't make its way into this deck because there are too many requirements. Like, it's a good minion if you can combo it with security, but this deck just has way more combo-like potential, especially with Halavera Dark Raven working so well with security if you already have a board on the field that essentially acts as like a mini Bloodlust, or if you have other rush minions, then you just get even more value out of this card. So this deck is really powerful. It's going to be a lot of people's #1 deck of day 1, but it's just whether or not it hits the mark and if it does actually deliver at being tier 1. But I think this is a great first deck to get invested into if you're low on dust. But if you're low on dust, just always wait for a couple of days before you make any of these decks. Please, like, just wait a couple of hours and then you'll figure out what the best decks are. Next up, we have a couple of different ideas for Druid, but this is my take on Hero Power Druid, and it still plays like with a token lean. I like the idea of the Hero Power deck. I'm just not sure exactly what deck it's supposed to go into, but I like this idea of kind of like mixing like these spell synergies, so that way we can play Queen, get the Horn, and we can play Solar Eclipse into Horn. And I've got another deck that really leans into this idea that I imagine is a little bit better than this deck. But since this deck isn't playing Undying Swarm, it's more focused on just being able to play for tempo and using the hero power. Like a 5/5 hero power is already doing enough. Like you really don't need to go all in with like 20 damage or whatever. But maybe if we're playing Zoc Foxmount, we need to go all in on making the biggest hero power possible, because this card may not be the greatest. But Summerflower Child, to play this on turn 6 when you already have like a 5/5 hero power, it just seems pretty decent. Summoning you know, a 6/6 with 2 5/5s is honestly pretty OP when you consider it. And then if you go all in on the hero power, then this can just summon just a gigantic minion. But all things considered, I still like the idea of this deck, because you can use Summer Child to grab Dr. Boom for 6 mana, Drum Circle. But Green Thumb Gardener is insane if you already have Drum Circle, because you can play 2 Green Thumb Gardeners into a Drum Circle, and then you have let's see, 7 9s with Taunt, and if you have any other minion that's in combination with that, it's just automatically insane. However, this may not be the best way to play this deck. This was me trying to make Hero Power Druid work, and there honestly might be a better way of doing this with Unending Swarms. But to go more into what Token Druid is capable of, this is like my spell Token Druid that I think has a lot of potential, and I think is going to be my best deck of day 1 if Frost DK isn't just the best deck that people should be playing. So I really like this idea of being able to go all in with this Queen Solar Eclipse combo, because you can also innervate Queen and just immediately get that Horn ready to go. And if you have Solar Eclipse and even like some ramp thanks to Seedsman, then Jesus Christ, dude, like this deck has a lot of potential. And if you guys have played Hearthstone in the past, you know how good Druid is when you have token minions into Soul of the Forest, and they literally make this card 1 mana cheaper, so it's even easier to technically pop this off, even though Flipper Friends is our really only payoff in order to combo this with Soul of the Forest. But we do have like Solar Eclipse into Soul of the Forest as a possibility. We have 1 mana Tree Ants, which is a really important thing to take advantage of, because now this card is 2 mana to actually summon a 2/2, which is now fair. You have Living Roots with Solar Eclipse to just summon 4 1/1s, and then you can stick some 2/2s. But the biggest combo of all is Solar Eclipse into Drum Circle, and if you happen to include the Green Thumb Gardener, then you have a lot of potential for this. And I have to give a shout out to Funky Monkey for his version of this deck, which kind of inspired these 2 different lists, because, well, this is an average turn 6. Pretty freaking good. And Funky Monkey, speaking of him, has also come out with a video himself with 11 different decks. So if you want even more deck lists, go ahead, check the description down below. There's even more decks that you can check out. I'm doing everything I can in order to show you every single deck that I have even peeked at, because there are a lot of ideas that are good. It's just a matter of which ones are going to dominate on day 1, and then we're going to have to somehow counter. Next up is a deck that I feel like has so much unleashed, like untapped potential, that I just don't even know where to begin, because I already had an idea for Naga Mage as my day 1 deck, but then I saw a post from Meaty, and this will also be in the description down below, because I know I'm cutting out some of these decks, but these are his ideas for day 1 decks that are going to do really well, and one of them really inspired me to just literally play this exact same list, because this is a click it and ship it deck. It looks so good that I don't think you need to change any card about it. But let me go ahead and tell you what the idea is. It's Naga Mage, so you just play Spitelash Summoner, play a bunch of minions and spells. But here's the setup though. Volume up on turn 4 to draw all the spells that you could possibly ask for into Spitelash Siren, into Mistake or Vicious Slither Spear on turn 6. Is really scary looking. And one other thing to point out is Rewind obviously works really well with Lightshow. But what happens when you have spell damage on the field? Suddenly this deals 3 per shot, and you can keep just like ramping up with all of these, you know, these cheap cards. You have Vat Wisdom in order to find even more like mana cheap potential, more spells that just keep working. Like, I think this deck has a lot of potential, and Naga Mage is one of my favorite decks in the previous year. We still need to keep this card at 5, because if this worked perfectly on turn 4 and a turn 5 do combo, then this would just be way insane at 4 mana. But I think there's a lot of potential going for this deck, and Naga Mage is a really cool deck that I'm hoping will come back in great capacity. Now we're going to start getting into the decks that I feel like have a lot of potential, but they're very dependent on their metagame in order to be good. But Jay Alex has been saying that if you play Kangor, you win with Big Paladin. But I have to say, Big Paladin did not perform very well in the Theorycraft stream, and I think it's because people were too hung up on how to specifically build the deck and also to fulfill the requirement of 10 new cards. But regardless, this deck looks really sweet and is very similar to the idea from Jay Alex, but I really don't like the idea of Starlight Groove in this deck, just because like there's a lot of 1/1 minions that are out there right now, so I'm just not too sure if this is the way to go, because there's not really too many holy spells in this deck either, and again, the Divine Shield just doesn't seem that powerful to me in this kind of archetype. So what I decided to do was to just put in a Baron Geddon, and I think there's one other newish card. Oh yeah, I put in another Service Bell. He only has one Service Bell. But one True Silver seems pretty good since we run double Muster for Battle. Muster for Battle is just an absolute necessary card in the early game in order to like make a quality feel good without having to require Consecration in combination with it. But just in case, I've also added Baron Geddon as like a late game stabilizer in case we need to do like an equality Baron Geddon play. But it also, Baron Geddon works pretty well with Kangor if you do give it lifesteal, so I think that has, you know, the synergy going for it as well. But other than that, these are the same big minions that that Jay Alex was running in the deck, but I decided not to put in Tyrion just because it didn't have immediate effects that I liked. Amplified Elic, Ragnaros, Leviathan, Neptulon, Stoneborn not really so much Neptulon, but Stoneborn General and all these other cards work really well with lifesteal, to where I think that Kangor has a lot of potential, but Big Paladin is going to be very dependent on the metagame that you happen to see on day 1. It's just a matter of whether or not it can keep up with the aggro decks that it'll go up against, or whether or not it can deal with like Control Warlocks, for example, potentially milling their cards. Next up is a deck that I really don't know how to build, but this was the closest iteration that I could build on stream today. The overall idea is to somehow make a criminal lineup OTK work, and the reason why I believe in this deck is because I think I died on turn 7 against someone doing this combo. And, like, the main idea is to play Inza to discount your Overload cards. You have Jive Insect for 4 mana, and then Criminal Lineup available for 7 mana. And if you can combine Jazz Base to discount the Criminal Lineup, then this might be a legitimate OTK deck that isn't just a meme where you play 4 Ragnaroses and just win the game. And just in case Ragnaros isn't good enough, you still have Alakir as a potential win condition, but you just don't have Rockbiter weapons. So maybe I need to put in a Rockbiter weapon in this deck in order to really make it shine. But I was already kind of struggling with like the last couple cards in this deck, because you want Saps to pump up the Jazz Base for free. Seems like a good way of being able to utilize Overdraft as well. But this is just like a spell-oriented deck to where you can play Prescience to draw the much-needed cards, because turn 4 Prescience and a turn 5 Inza seems pretty good. You have Alakir as well as, you have Alakir and Ziliax as like your other cards that you can draw off of the Prescience, but you have the 1 copy of Instrument Tech, just because, you know, Prescience on turn 4, if this does happen to hit Instrument Tech, you can still play this into the Jazz Base on turn 5. So this deck has some potential for it, but it's probably not the best way to build this combo, but I really wanted to just give my take on this deck. However, I argue it is going to need a little bit of optimization. So if you have a Shaman deck that actually seems good, put it in the comments below, because I would love to take a look at it, because this was unfortunately the best that I could come up with, and I'm just going to tell you right now, this is probably the worst deck on this list. Next up is one of my proudest decks from the Theorycraft stream that I've yet to make a video about, but a video will be coming out soon showcasing this deck, and I've only made one change from the Theorycraft list, actually. I took out a Suspicious Alchemist, and what did I put in? I think I put in Ziliax, just because I wanted more healing and more sustainability in this deck. But Ziliax actually kind of works because you play cards like Audio Splicer as well as Audio Amplifier, so you do have ways of actually getting value out of the Magnetize. But the overall combo and the main thing of this deck is to do a DJ Mana Storm combo for 20 damage, possibly, if you decide to play Audio Amplifier and go to 11 mana. But the even bigger combo is with Thaddeus, and wait till you hear about this one. So imagine you play Thaddeus, and then you play double Pyro, or even triple Pyro. Let's just imagine triple Pyro because you have volume up. You play triple Pyro into Commander Shovara into triple Pyro again. Because if you have Thaddeus on the even polarity, then you can play 3 1-mana Pyros, followed by a 1-mana Shovara into 3 more 1-mana Pyros, all for 7 mana. But that is required. That is a requirement of Bone Lord to try and set this up, because obviously you need the Thaddeus to be 0 mana. But this combo is just so good, and the reason why I think this deck has potential is because Solid Alibi Rewind is low-key very toxic. I'm not gonna lie, this is a very toxic combo, so you have plenty of time to build up the combo and reach the 10 mana that you need. But I'm just gonna say that if this combo becomes meta relevant, it is going to get hit with some very quick nerfs, because unfortunately there is a lot of really toxic things that Rewind can set up, Solid Alibi being one of them. But imagine in Wild Ice Block. Ice Block is a card I'm very worried about in Wild. And even in like Standard, you can do things with like Blizzard, but I don't think it's nearly as powerful. But Rewind is definitely a 5 out of 4 card if you're rating on a 4 system. And if you're rating on a 5 system, then this card is a 10 out of 5, just because it's that powerful. Do not sleep on Mage. There is going to be a tier 1 Mage deck. It's just a matter of whether or not it's aggro or if it's some kind of like weird stall combo deck. And the last deck that I want to show you guys is definitely my biggest meme, but I really think there's some kind of potential here, because it's essentially Aggro Hunter with like some kind of big scam. So the idea of this deck is pretty straightforward if you've already seen my Ozumat Hunter video, and I really don't think this deck has too many changes outside of the Zilliax that I added into this deck. But I don't have the 4-drop mech anymore. The, I can't think of the name. What's the name? Dragonbane. I took out Dragon's Bane, because unfortunately it just doesn't really fit in this deck, and we really don't want to run Tour Guide as like our 0 mana enabler to make that turn 4 deal 7 combo possible. So what I decided to do was kind of go in with the first idea, just play a bunch of 1-drops, and then play a bunch of bananas in order to buff those 1-drops, pressure early in the game, and then once your opponent has some kind of clear, then you can play Big Dreams, pull out Ozumat, and then you have Shadehound ready to go in hand in order to buff those little guys into bigger threats. So I think this deck has some potential, but unfortunately this is kind of a meme deck. But if you don't want to run these big cards, then all you need to do is just take them out and just go all in on the Aggro Hunter archetype. And one thing I want to point out that I think is really funny is that on turn 1, you can play Thormanda Musician into Snow Flipper Penguin, and that's a 1/3 into a 2/2. Or something else that you can do is this into Coin, play this again, pop up the Finale twice into a 3/3 Snow Flipper Penguin. Or even better, on your next turn, you could play a 3/6 Taunt on turn 2. Oh my dear God, Silverback Patriarch has just been power creep beyond belief. It is absolutely hilarious. But there's a lot of stuff going on with this deck to where I think it has a lot of potential. It's just whether or not this Ozumat combo is actually going to be good or not. And if I was a betting man, I'm going to argue it's not, but this combo is just way too sweet for me not to highlight it. And honestly, these last 3 decks are kind of copium decks, but I'm really hoping that these are at least a little bit of fun in order to balance out how maybe not so consistent they are. But there you guys have it. That is 15 plus however many decks are in all of these other videos and guides that I have shown you. So if you guys like this video or find it informative at all, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. And definitely check out everybody else's videos in order to get as much information as possible, because day 1 is going to be lit. I am beyond excited. This is the most excited that I've been for an expansion in a long time, and I definitely do not say that every single expansion. It's perfectly themed for a musician like myself, and the fact that Hearthstone and music is colliding in one world, I don't think I could have asked for anything better. So guys, thank you for making it to the end of this video. Hopefully at least one of these decks found you know, some kind of vibe with you. I try to include as many aggro decks, control decks, combo decks, as many different types as possible in order to please every single Hearthstone player that I could potentially meet. So hopefully you guys found at least one of these decks interesting or somewhat inspiring. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video, and we'll see you tomorrow. And, well, I guess later today, or I guess tomorrow. We'll see you when Festival of Legends starts. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video, and we'll see you for the next one.